You ready?
Yep.
Okay. I would like to call to order Airway Heights Planning Commissioners Meeting, April 13, 2022 at 6 p.m. I'd like to make a roll call. Commissioner Patel, present. Commissioner Mark,
Present.
Commissioner Angelina, Commissioner Hank. Hello?
Present.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Were you speaking through a horn today?
I had it on mute.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Stephanie. Okay. So we're gonna proceed. I don't know if we should absent the two commissioners or wait for their arrival, since we haven't heard from them. So I'd like to leave it open for now.
I'm okay with that, Cal.
You okay? All right, then we'll move forward, and then if we need to revisit that particular item, we'll do that. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Who wants to do that, Mark, or should I start?
I can do it, Cal.
Come on, you got a nice voice, that's why.
No, I'll take care of it, Cal.
Thank you,
Just let me
sir.
know when you're. No problem.
Start when you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One
One
nation,
nation
under
under
God.
God.
indivisible,
Visible,
liberty and justice for all.
For
Cal, Angelina just joined. Her audio is connecting, but she is here.
okay, so we'll just mark her present.
Yeah, so we're just we haven't heard from Stephanie.
Okay. I'd like to get a motion to approve tonight's agenda for April 13, 2022.
I'll make a motion to pass tonight's agenda from 2020, our previous agenda.
Anybody second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? If none, we'll continue. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Everybody in favor? I'd like to get a approval of the minutes of March 9, 2022 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for tonight. Or
Anybody
the
want a
minutes for the
second?
previous meeting.
I will second.
Any comments or anything to discuss? If no discussion, let's put it forward. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So anybody signed up for the public comment tonight? Zach?
No, we do have one member of the public. Well, we have two members of the public. Michael is here for the public hearing on the electrical fence ordinance. So Michael, if you have a comment that is not related to that, this would be the time, but if you'll have an opportunity later to discuss that. So Mark Loesch, from the West Plains Chamber is here. Mark, do you have any comments you'd like to give?
No, I am fine. I'm just here to gather information to be connected.
Perfect. Thank you. No other members of the public, Cal, you're good to go.
Okay, then if we don't have anybody, I'll close that. There's no presentation tonight. So I'm gonna head straight into the public hearing. And I would like to open the public hearing for tonight for the electric fence ordinance at 6:06 p.m. Like to make some comments. All comments by opponents or other members of the public shall be made from the podium, and we don't have a podium here, so I guess from Zoom. Any individuals making comments, they first give their name and address. This is required because an official recording of the hearing is being made. If a person is physically challenged and requires special accommodation, the chair shall be advised. No comment shall be made from any location other than the Zoom. Any person making out of order comments that shall be subject to removal from the meeting. In this case, we'll mute you out. There shall be no demonstration, applause, or other audience participating during or at the conclusion of any person's presentation. These rules are intended to promote an orderly system of holding a public hearing, giving every person an opportunity to be heard, and to ensure that no individual is annoyed or embarrassed by exercising his or her right of speech. So I'd like to open the meeting. If we have anybody from the, I'll hand it over to staff to give us the summary on details on the fence.
So let me get my PowerPoint up. We'll do a quick staff presentation. I'll take any questions from the commission, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to provide comments as well. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can see that.
No, I'm always concerned about that. So tonight we are reviewing amendments to AHMC 1720 fences and walls. So a little background, the proposal amends 17.20 fences and walls. It provides for the expanded use of electrified fences and increased fence height for electrical fences in non-residential areas within the city. The full text that is being recommended as a draft is available within the staff report in the packet all commissioners received. In general, proposed changes include the expanded ability to place electrical fences within non-residential sites in industrial zones. The type of electrical fence that will be allowed is specified within the amendment. It's a very limited scope. I'm sure Michael will discuss what that really looks like when he has the opportunity. Electrical fences are proposed to have a maximum height of 8 feet, which is 2 feet taller than the maximum allowed height of 6 feet for fences within the city. There are also additional minor changes throughout the code to provide consistency with this new amendment. If you review the language, you'll see that. The procedural steps involved in this amendment included a public participation process, which we are currently in the midst of. There was a SEBA review. A determination of non-significance was issued back in February. A Department of Commerce 60-day review is currently in process. I believe it should conclude in the first week of May. So that should, depending on timing, should be right around when we are doing the city council hearing, unless this hearing is stayed for another month. So the additional step is a planning analysis, which is included within the staff report as well. Within this draft was given to the applicant for review, and the applicant did have a couple of questions, and I do want to spend some time responding specifically to the questions proposed by the applicant. And some things in here we're actually going to ask the Planning Commission to consider and provide feedback on and decide on how to move forward. So the first piece, the applicant commented that the proposed language limits the installation to industrial zones only and prohibits from commercial zones. They go on to state that there are businesses within the commercial zones that are interested within installing these fences, and we should consider allowing these electrical fences within commercial zones. We reviewed this comment in relation to the text draft and came up with some conclusions. After reviewing allowed uses within the C1 and C1A zones, we determined that since the idea behind the C1 and the C1A is to have a denser, more walkable storefront, a retail, personal service kind of feature, we did not feel like electrical fences were appropriate within those areas. But we did review the C2 zone as well, which is designed to be more auto-centric, more general commercial. So on the kind of the edges of the allowed uses within the C2 zones, some of those uses may be appropriate. So we specifically looked at the uses in the C2 that currently require a conditional use permit. So I wanted to read those off to you so you have an idea of the ones we're looking at. So C2 zone uses that require a conditional use permit include structured parking, if permitted to other permitted use, public parking lots, limited industrial, self-storage or warehouse, archery, rifle, pistol range, or club, indoor only, automobile and truck equipment sales and rental and maintenance, recreational vehicle sales, storage lot processing, lumber yards, solid waste hauler and tank storage underground. So as you can see, a lot of those uses that already require a CUP are kind of borderline industrial anyway. So what we're asking is that you may consider allowing the electrical fences on these uses that we've already established that require a CUP. Does that make sense? Okay. The second piece to this here is during a meeting with the applicant, there was this discussion about regional consistency with the city of Spokane, and we reviewed the city of Spokane's regulations because they have a very similar regulation to what we're considering. There are only a handful of communities within the state of Washington that do permit electrical fences outside the context of animal containment. So the language is actually very similar to what city of Spokane has. There are some additional requirements that we are not recommending at this time, but we'd like the planning commission to consider adding to the draft. It's essentially up to you guys if you'd like these or not. I wanted to give you an idea of what that would look like. So Spokane also requires a limitation for use for outdoor storage that's not in residential areas. Limitations on installation within 150 feet of a property line for a residence or from a school or from a daycare facility, unless the exterior perimeter non-electrified fence is covered with a solid covering, e.g. solid mesh, slates, etc., to further prevent contact with the electrical fence, and limitations on installation within 5 feet of a sidewalk, trail, or other pedestrian connection unless the exterior perimeter non-electrified fence is covered with the solid covering. So again, at this point, we don't have that within the draft. We're not recommending it, but it's something the commission can consider adding if they're interested in that. The second comment from the applicant had to do with a specific section. That section, it reads, electrical fences shall be subject to the screening requirements of AHMC 17.22070 when installed adjacent to, across the street, or an alley from a non-industrial zone. So that's the proposed language. The section it's quoting there, so 17.22070 is actually a part of our landscape code. So it reads electrical, so location of required landscaping provides information on the location and requirements of landscape screening for properties that abut separate zones. So essentially it's cross-referencing an already requirement within the landscape code. So what we're really doing is just providing consistency with something that's already there. So it's just a point of clarity, and it has to do with screening when abutting two separate zones. So that's essentially what we're looking at there. The third piece, the comment was that height limitations are a huge issue and render the devices impotent if restrictions are in place. In order to properly deter crime, the height must be 10 feet or 2 feet taller than the perimeter fence at a minimum. So there are two pieces here again. One, our code does read that electrical fences shall have a maximum height of 8 feet and a minimum height of 6 feet. So our current height limitation is 6 feet for a perimeter fence. So allowing an 8-foot fence is 2 feet taller. So we are meeting what they're requesting there already with an 8-foot fence. The second piece is a little more involved and has to do with consistency with barbed wire fencing. So currently barbed wire fencing is allowed in an industrial zone. The section limits the use of barbed wire fencing to not exceeding 3 strands. It may be permitted at the top of a fence, providing the arm does not project over public property. The minimum height to the bottom of the strand of the barbed wire shall not be less than 6 feet from the finished grade. So staff is recommending that the commission consider amending that portion of the code to allow for either the placement of the proposed electric fence or barbed wire, but not both. So this would create an either or scenario that would address any concerns regarding the potential for a perimeter fence to be taller or as tall as the proposed electrical fence. So essentially, we're asking the commission to consider how you can have an electrical fence or you can have a barbed wire fence, so there isn't an issue with that 2 feet tall. So with that, I just wanted to reiterate some of the considerations we're leaving with the commission. So allowing for limited use of electrical fences in the C2 zone through the conditional use permitting process, including additional language used by the city of Spokane to provide for regional consistency for the permitting of electrical fences, and also including additional language that provides for a more clear either or scenario when both barbed wire and electrical fences are being considered. So that concludes my presentation. If the commission have any questions, I can take those now. And also Heather is available as well, who's a wealth of knowledge.
So what I would be curious.
Oh, go ahead,
No, I
Mark.
apologize.
Go
I
ahead.
apologize, Kyle. Okay.
No, go ahead.
Am I understanding just correctly that we would say no barbed wire and electric fence together, and the reason we're doing that is to try to avoid it going over 8 feet?
Yeah, so we're essentially doing what we can to maintain that 2-foot barrier between a perimeter fence and that electrical fence. And also the code right now, as it reads, is not very clear on whether it's an either or scenario or if potentially someone could have both. So we're asking you to consider amending that to make it a little more clear, but also provide that consistency with what the electrical fence ordinance is requesting with the 2 feet differential.
So let's say an applicant came in and they had a 4-foot electric fence and then a 2-foot barbed wire. Would that be okay? I understand it's not practical, but would it be okay under the rules?
Heather, what are your thoughts on that?
It might be helpful to bring up the draft of the fence code, Zach.
Yeah. Just 1 second here.
I believe there's a section that talks about the minimum height of the electric fence. And while Zach's bringing that up, I'll just address part of Mark's question, which was the applicant was concerned about having 2 fences adjacent to each other, the perimeter non-electrified fence being somewhere around the same height as the electrified fence. We allow the electrified fence to believe to be a minimum of 6 feet and a maximum of 8 feet. Normally, any other fence, or if it's slatted, it's chain link, or it's vinyl, all of those perimeter fences in all of the zones are maximum height of 6 feet. So to help facilitate the concern by the applicant that 2 fences almost of equal height to each other would allow for someone to use a ladder to get over it, the thought process by staff was to simply limit the perimeter fence, whatever that material is, vinyl, wood, chain link, to 6 feet, so that the electrified fence would potentially be higher and up to 8 feet. And so if you think about essentially a vertical disparity would be included by the standards under what Zach's suggesting, is to consider eliminating the barbed wire in that scenario so that there's a vertical difference.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
How was the maximum for barbed wire? The height?
So the maximum
10?
for barbed wire is 6 feet plus 3 strands, and I believe the 3 strands is equivalent to like 1.5 feet or something similar.
So what was the 10 feet? I'm sorry, 10 feet maximum somewhere?
The 10 feet was what the applicant requested. The staff believes that 8 feet is the appropriate height because that's consistent with other requirements around fencing and that we're allowing it higher than our already maximum fence height.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. I just wanted to also add that in Zach's staff report that we did include some other cleanup issues in the fence code. That is something that's allowable for us to do during a text amendment, which was to create internal consistency between the zones. And I just put a note in here, clarity of one point. which is that the city does not require a permit for a residential fence. We are only requiring permits for non-residential fences. But the expectation, as is with all types of zoning standards, is there's an expectation for compliance. And so I just wanted to highlight that we did do a little bit of code cleanup that was suggested by our building official.
Anybody have any questions or comments? So I think we would probably, Zach, need your help on this, is trying to organize this in I guess, first question would be the C1, C2.
Mhm.
And the second one will be the C2 limitation with conditional approval, correct?
Sorry, let me pull my,
I just want to make sure we go in a methodical order so that we can follow all these requirements and discuss it amongst the commissioners.
and Cal, if you would like to hear from the applicant before making your consideration.
Okay, let's
that's
do that.
Totally
Okay.
fine. So,
Okay.
And I'd like to just note for the plan commission that there are decision criteria for text amendment. Those were included in the staff analysis, and the staff report is in the packet that was provided to the plan commission. So questions like consistency with the comprehensive plan, appropriate mitigation for a proposal, consideration of its impacts on public right of way and other public facilities, et cetera. That's all been reviewed by staff, and there are comments from the staff as part of all those decision criteria part of the record. And it also includes a proposal of a resolution for the plan commission to consider as this is an advisory recommendation to the city council, since a text amendment is a legislative action and final decision is with the city council.
Zach, you want to open up the public comments? We only have one person tonight, right?
yeah, and there is a representative for the proponent, which is Michael. I'll
Okay.
go ahead. Let me stop sharing. Michael, do you have a PowerPoint or anything you'd like to share? No. Okay. Yeah, Cal, I'll let you take it.
Okay. Open up for Michael.
Can you hear me? I'm open.
Hey, how are you?
Great.
Can
Thank
you
you very
just
much.
state your name and address, and then you can continue, sir?
All right. My name is Michael Pate. I am Director of Government Affairs with Amaroq in Columbia, South Carolina. 315 South Maple Street is where I live, and 550 Assembly Street is where the corporate headquarters are in Columbia, South Carolina. So the reason we're here is we've had some folks out there basically ask us to install our device to protect their properties. They're getting robbed left and right, and they have installed our device in other properties, and we've been very effective at stopping crime. So that's why we've been called in here to help them amend the code here in Airway Heights. So I'm gonna go to all of Zach's issues here with us and with our issues with the draft, so we can go through this. But first, let me do a little primer so you understand how these work. So basically what we're operating with here is a 12-volt battery. So the same battery you have in your car, your truck, your boat, that is the primary power source for the entire device. So we're never connected to the electrical infrastructure at all. We keep the battery charged with a couple of solar panels. In the case that we have inclement weather that might obscure the solar panels from a little sunlight, we keep that battery charged with a trickle charger, and that's all in the draft. So basically what we do is we take that 12 volts and we amplify it. It takes 1.3 seconds to amplify that voltage up to 7,000 to 9,000 volts. Once that's accomplished, the Energizer mechanically can no longer hold that voltage, and it releases that voltage down the line back to an alarm panel. So we do a quick perimeter check once every 1.3 seconds. That perimeter check takes 3/10,000ths of a second. Very fast, very difficult to measure. We go back to the alarm panel. The alarm panel is looking for a nice, clean return. Clean return in our world is 2,000 volts or more. If the alarm panel does not get 2,000 volts or more, it starts a countdown. And if it goes through 5 consecutive negative returns, it sets the alarm off audibly on the site and also back to our call center in Columbia, South Carolina. And we go through a call list to see what's happening out there. So let's say Zach's number 1 on my call list. We'll call poor old Zach at 2:30 in the morning. Zach, we got a break over here, 220 feet from the northeast corner. What do you want to do? Well, we also have cameras associated with these devices. So he can sit at home on his Wi-Fi, bring up that particular fence line and give it a good look. Hey man, we had like a bunch of tumbleweeds came rolling across the prairie, or we dropped a tree on the line, butt it up and go back to bed. Or I got 5 guys in a flatbed truck, cut a hole in my fence and they're robbing me blind. Please call the Airway Heights Police Department. That's called a verified alarm, and the police love verified alarms because they know where to go and what to expect. So we're not connected directly to the police department because we want to make sure if we have to call the police department that we have some action going on out there. So that's what we do. Now, let me address the height really quick. So the standards which are dictated within the draft that we have out there, the IEC standard 60335-2-76, encompasses all the details that are in the draft. So it talks to the energizer, the height of the device, the warning signs, separation between the fence and the device, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all that's incorporated in there. So the reason that you need some of these conditions that I've spoke about are height. One is that if you've got one up here like this and another fence like this, they're only about 2 to 4 inches apart. Someone's just going to stand on this one, drop inside, do their dirty business, and when they break out, that's when the alarm sounds. So as we're up, they're not doing that. It's very difficult to jump from 10 feet high or hurdle from 10 feet high and hit the ground without hurting yourself. And most criminals, you know, they're really not very industrious. They don't want to hurt themselves. We force everyone down to the bottom where they have to cut the fence. That's why you need the height up there. The height is also dictated within the standard. So you're in controversy with the standard when you start changing the height. So it's a very simple reason we need the height up there. Zones are a different matter. I understand the zones and how you folks might want to not have electric fences in certain places within your retail areas. And that's really taken care of by your existing fence code. The standard that's been predicated within the draft, IEC 60335, states that you have to have a minimum of 5-foot tall fence before you can install anywhere, anytime, no matter what the zone is. So if your fence code says 4 feet tall, I can't install. If it says 4.5 feet, I can't install. Retail, who's going to have a fence up around their retail operation? No one in their right mind, we're not going to install. So it's really a red herring when you start running through zoning like this. You know, people who need protection, and if they have the ability within the city of Airway Heights to have a minimum 5-foot tall fence, then they can install behind it. Otherwise, they cannot. So everything is controlled by the perimeter fence. Let me go to screening real quick here. Screening basically is in your fence code, and that is required for new development that's out there. You know, I'm not a new development and I'm not a use. I'm a security system. I'm an alarm. So I'm not a use. I'm not using property. What I'm doing is protecting property. So it's a misnomer to say that this is a use. It's used for either storage or any industrial or retail capacity or commercial capacity. But you know, what I'm doing is not a use. What I'm doing is protecting property. So to insert that in there and insinuate that we're a use, we're really not. I mean, we're an alarm system and we're a deterrent. So I really think that needs to go out because again, that's predicated on the fence codes that you have existing. And when someone installs a perimeter fence, that would apply. If someone already has one up, there's no reason to do all this all over again. It doesn't make any sense to me. Another thing is that, basically we got what we asked for here as far as considering us an alarm, which is stated in the draft too. So if we're going to be an alarm, it doesn't make much sense to also throw the fence codes at me. I mean, you're either one or the other. And I don't mind being one and I don't mind being the other, but being both is a little laborious in my mind. So, the standard state, the way we should be treated as an alarm, and that's the way we should be treated. And to put us in the fence codes, in my mind, is a little bit out of bounds, but this is what the staff wanted to do, and that's what they presented to you. One mistake I saw in there that you need to correct is that the signage states that it should be every 60 feet. Within the standard, the standard asks you to install warning signs every 10 meters, which is approximately 30 feet. So I would advise you to change that to be consistent with the standard. You might have sign standards that don't allow you to do that. I don't know because we didn't address that here, and I'm not really familiar with them. So that's one change that I would advocate for you right there. And besides that, that's kind of how it works. Now, we're always inside the existing fence line. We're always signed. The signs are in English and Spanish at a minimum. I print in 32 languages across America, depending on the neighborhood. The signs are a hand with a lightning bolt going through them, which is the international standard for shock. And the sign says caution 7,000 volts. And to be quite frank, most of what I do is erect the device, put up the signs, and most people won't touch it because your body abhors electricity. Think about it this way. You wake up in the middle of the night, a little chilly night, you got your socks on, you skid across the carpet, you reach out to hit that door handle in the bathroom door, and bang, you get that big shock, that big static shock. That's a 15,000 volt shock. Less than what I do, but you don't want to do it again because it's uncomfortable. So that's what we do. We protect properties. 98.6% of the time, the police never have to go out there again. They don't have to go out there and investigate. They don't have to file reports. They don't have to drive by on an extended basis to make sure nothing's happening on that spot. We lock these places down cold. So we're a great asset to have in your community. And I appreciate you listening to me. And if you have any questions at all, I'd be glad to answer.
This is Cal. I want to ask you a question. As far as the shock, it's just a few seconds, right? It's not continuous, right?
That is correct. It's a pulse, Cal. So once every 1.3 seconds, boom, it pulses down the line for 0.3 of a second. So it's a pulse device. You're exactly right.
And is it just a regular fence that you connect this to, or it's a different look?
Well, it's made out of wire, obviously. I think, as I recall, that chain link is about 10 or 12 gauge. We're a little bit thinner than that, maybe about 2/3 of the thickness. We run 20 strands, 4 inches apart until it gets about 3 feet off the ground. And then we go to 8-inch separation horizontal to the ground. It's very difficult to see. Frankly, the only way you can see it is if you know it's there and you're looking for it. You drive by it.
Right.
Yeah, you drive by it at a normal rate of speed at 25, 35 miles an hour. You're not going to see it. If you're walking by it, yeah, you can see it if you walk by. If you're on a sidewalk, and most of the places we're in, there usually aren't sidewalks. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Can you see it, or it's not seenable on a road? Anybody else have any questions for Michael?
Yeah, Michael, this is Commissioner Hank Beinecke. How many milliamps is that system? Is it 120?
No. Voltage and amps are actually high. It's 7 to 9,000 volts, depending on the energizer we have. Milliamps are up there too. They're like 7 to 9 milliamps. The reason it's safe is because it's a pulse device. So if you had that many milliamps on an AC device, which is basically what you have in your infrastructure in your home, that's a lethal device. But because of the pulse, it makes it a non-lethal device. And think about this: you've probably seen something very similar to this out in the countryside. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there that have cattle and livestock fences, and those cattle and livestock fences are designed to push those cows and horses and goats away. You don't want to injure them. That's your livelihood. But it's also a pulse device. So that's how they operate. They're a pulse device, and they're not going to hurt a soul.
No, I understand that pulsing is so that you can get away from the damn thing, right?
Absolutely. So it's
But
30,000ths of a second, so it's not going to grip you.
right.
So if you're in an AC device, like let's say you put your hand into an exposed outlet in your house, what it really does, it contracts your muscles.
Right.
The current running through your body contracts your muscles, and that makes you grip it. So this does not do that. So we have all the studies. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Michael. How many milliamps did you say this is? Did you
7
say
to 9?
7 to 9 milliamps?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Michael, I'm just
Michael.
curious, do you have these installed anywhere within Spokane County?
Oh yeah, I've got several in Spokane. There's another little city right next to Spokane. I can't remember the name of it. It's like East Spokane or something. It's been a while since I've been out there.
Spokane
Spokane
Valley.
Valley, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got several of them over there. Within those areas, yes, I have several of them over there. I'm not sure of the exact number, but they're over there. If you'd like an address, we'll be able to give you an address. You can go by and see it. So you can see an installation and what it looks like. Be glad to do that.
Did you, because if we're going through and trying to adopt something similar to Spokane itself, I would assume the Spokane Valleys would be very similar too. Did you run into any issues doing those fences or security devices, shall we call them?
No, it's the exact same thing, same questions, and the same concerns. I mean, basically, I scare the hell out of people. Pardon me for saying that, but 7,000 volts on a sign is a scary thing to see. And if you don't understand what it is, you want to take a little bit of time to evaluate what's going on here in your neighborhood. So, unfortunately, I scare criminals, but unfortunately, I also scare city staffs and planning commissions and city councils too. So,
It's the 7,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate the information.
Yes, sir.
So question for staff. I and Michael May can help us too, but I want to address the 10-foot scenario which you brought up, which was a good point that if one fence is at 8 and the other is at 10, then there's no purpose of using this electrical fence because people can jump over. How is Spokane County handling that?
Well, I'm not sure I've gone to the county. I know I've been in the city.
No, the
So I'm not
city,
sure if
okay. Just
Yeah, the
okay.
city.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Now, you're in Washington. So I've also dealt with L&I, Labor and Industries. That was the first group that I ever had to engage over in Washington State. So, I've run 60 to 80 permits through L&I at this height. So, but those are in non-incorporated areas or in areas where the locality really doesn't have the expertise to deal with this type of technology because it's very unusual, and most chief electrical inspectors aren't familiar with it. It's an educational process.
Thank you, Michael. Any commissioners or staff have any questions for Michael?
I don't have a question.
Go ahead. Was that Mark?
Yes, I was going to speak, but I don't know if Heather was coming in as well. I would rather hear from Heather first.
Yeah, maybe. Heather,
Oh, no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I just have some answers to some of the questions that came up during this presentation. So, clearly I went to their website and I brought up the image because somebody wanted to know what one looked like. There are actually several of these already in Airway Heights, very close to where Commissioner Patel and Vice Chair Mark's businesses are, and those are located at the intersection of Hayford and 21st Avenue at DAA, as an example
Okay.
of that. That was fences not to be electrified. The purpose of that fence would be if this text amendment were to be passed, and it was only permitted at 8 feet. But if you wanted to look at an example of one, you could drive by that location. I have a few more items, but just to kind of quickly indicate where you could look and see a couple of these examples. And then I'll follow up once the commissioners are complete with their questions of Mr. Pate.
Mark?
Honestly, it's of staff.
Okay.
So can we show a map of where this would be placed? The area, the C2, I'm forgetting where that's at.
Yes, we can pull up the zoning map. The proposal by staff is to only allow it in the light and the heavy industrial zones. Because those uses, when we look at the zoning table, are uses that are likely to potentially request this type of fencing. We most often see full perimeter fencing around those locations. So the light gray and the dark gray on the map would be locations that we would propose under the code. We are not able to show you where conditional use permits would be because in the dark red, there are additional uses, both interior and exterior uses that we've suggested that the Plan Commission could allow the consideration of these fences as part of the conditional use permits. So they're site-specific, context-specific applications for uses like warehousing that can be allowed in the C2 zone or parking structures. I think there was a list there, certain yards in which building materials are stored or into interior building materials may be stored. So those would be a case by case under a conditional use permit.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Spokane Municipal Code, and the height for electrical fences is saying 6 feet or 8 feet to 10 feet at the max.
That is the city of Spokane's code. What Airway Heights is recommended because of our code is a 2-foot differential to allow for that increase, that concern of someone having a ladder and getting to the top of an existing 6-foot fence, which is what our current code allows, and allowing that 2 foot of additional height for the electrified fence.
Well, that could be barbed wire if they go beyond 6 feet if they wanted to put barbed wire in.
Only in the industrial zone are you allowed to do 3 strands of barbed wire. The barbed wire is not allowed in any commercial zone.
So Heather, Mr. Tate mentioned that it's considered a security device, not a fence in other applications. I'm trying to understand how that pertains to things. Like, did the city already acknowledge it as something different than a fence?
No, that is incorrect. The fact that it's electrified is the means of which the alarm system and the deterrent is used, but it's still a fenced structure. Just as our current code considers an electrified fence or animal containment to be a fence. So our code already considers that fencing is a structure, requires a permit, and that it can be made from a variety of materials. And so, again, that would be incorrect. It is a fence. The fact that it's electrified is a feature that is being used to augment the structure that's being erected.
Okay, thank you.
If no, anybody have any further questions or comments?
I do have a couple of
Go ahead.
follow-up comments, if that would be allowed.
No, go ahead.
Oh, certainly. I just wanted to point out, while the zoning map up there, that while certainly there are parties that may be interested in this type of fencing, there are other fencing alternatives. And as the staff already indicated in the report, there are locations that are probably not appropriate for a double fence, including an electrified fence. The light pink areas, this is our proposed downtown area, which Zach already indicated is a pedestrian oriented type of uses that we certainly understood the applicant's concern that there could be uses both internally and on a site that may need this additional protection. And we looked through our zoning code to look at those type of uses that it could be associated with, and our recommendation is to allow it associated with a conditional use permit. But if you can imagine an electrified fence around Walmart, or electrified fence around what used to be Hickman's on US 2, or some of the other locations along our community commercial zones, probably not appropriate locations. But there certainly are issues in our community that businesses that would request the service could very much benefit from this type of fencing, which is one of the reasons why we are recommending approval of that. There have been a number of break-ins, particularly to a certain type of use in our community, which is the long-term storage of vehicles preparing for auction because of the federal requirements for them to be stored between 30 and 90 days before they can be converted to miles versus kilometers, and a couple of other minor changes, and then moving on to the auction yards. Those long-term storage of those vehicles, up to 90 days, have attracted crime, and people have been breaking through the fences to get to those vehicles. And so I just note that those uses are an allowed use in the heavy industrial area. There would be a conditional use in any of the light industrial zones. Those type of activities, is my understanding, who requested them, and this fencing specifically from this client in the past. And we think that our proposal certainly meets that demand in those locations at this time. And I think I heard a question.
Yes, Heather, Mark, I'm just curious, because you said that some of these locations you would want them to use an alternative to the electrified fence to deter theft. What are those alternatives? Like, what's just an example? Is barbed wire an example to that?
So in commercial areas, there certainly is the cyclone fencing. There's the wood fencing or vinyl fencing. So let's take Walmart as an example. They've completely enclosed a portion of their site using a fence and using the materials that are allowed in the code in order to protect their seasonal materials that they bring in and store outside, as an example of that. And I'm sure all of you can remember or kind of think of that, where they've built that enclosure to protect that merchandise. They also use video in order to protect those sites and have monitoring with security around those locations. So I guess the idea is that there are a variety of options for businesses above and beyond electrical fence, and not every solution is going to fit each site perfectly. And there certainly are reasons why, as I've already noted, that probably not allowing a double fence and electrified fence in our commercial areas, other than contextually what the type of uses that the code would allow, is probably appropriate.
So what I would be curious to know is what's allowed based on, so bringing up like the downtown area, and can you imagine how people would react to electrified fence being there? So is the alternative to the electric fence actually safer though, or alleviates the person's fears? Because if it's just we're concerned people will see it and be fearful of it because it's in an area that we don't want to portray an image a certain way, well, that doesn't mean the alternative is safer. It could be, I feel like, how is that decision being made on which material is allowed and not allowed in any individual zone?
Well, the description of the materials that are allowed in the zones is already codified, and we can certainly put that back up on the screen for you. So it includes things like brick, block, wood, mesh, etc. Those are decisions that were made across all of the zones as far as appropriate fencing material. I don't believe that there's been any point that staff has presented either verbally or in testimony that the concerns about the electric fence have to do with the concerns of being electrified. I think that was something that Mr. Pate had indicated that he'd experienced in other communities when approached for a potential fence amendment. What we've recommended here is to be consistent with our code with regards to the type of materials, and then look at various uses where a double fence with additional height, which is what's proposed, would seem to be the most appropriate with our zones.
Thank you.
I was just going to also add that the code that Mr. Pate is referencing with regards to an IE standard, IEC is not a required adopted standard for our community or for our county. It has to do with the electrification and not with the fence standards. We are free and able, as any community is in Washington State, to adopt maximum fence heights or minimum fence heights that are not affected by that code. And so I just wanted to leave that as a clear understanding that there is not an overriding requirement on that code for our fence heights. Let's see. There was, I think, a question about where they're at, which I pointed out where a couple of those are. One of them certainly there at Hayford and 21st Avenue. There's an additional one that received a permit waiting for this text amendment to go through about less than a quarter of a mile to the west down 21st Avenue on the south side, which I believe is Jam Importers. It was also only permitted as an 8-foot fence and not as a 10-foot fence at that location. Certainly the changing of the spacing for signage, we can certainly do that. I believe that the input on the spacing came from the fire department and was also pulled from the city of Spokane code as an example of that. The landscaping, so just as a clarity, and this is maybe something that, you know, we could add some language to be really clear, but the intent is not to require perimeter landscaping just because a fence goes in. We don't currently require that. It is a new site development standard, but I think that part of the nuance of applying code, you know, as a planner is that new site development standards, such as requiring landscaping, we know that that happens because when we look at the code, it says that landscaping is put in with new development or when development exceeds 50% of the existing improvements. And that is building improvements, and there's a guide as to looking at the county assessor's records for the value of the assessed value of the existing building compared to the building code value of the improvements within the building. So we are not requiring landscaping just because a electrified fence goes in or any other fence, but it is a standard that would apply to a new site, and it helps for purposes of ensuring that when we do a site development review, that the contractor developer knows that they'll have to set back that fence as part of the new project appropriately based on that landscaping when it's required. So just a clarity, we're not requiring it just because the fence goes in, but if it was a new site with a fence on a new development site, which includes the parking review, the landscaping review, the building footprint review, yes, there would be landscaping required for a site like it would on any other application. And so those are just some of the clarifications I just wanted to give to the planning commission about the various codes and their relationship to this proposal.
I like to open up a question. So, for example, if we decide that this device is an alarm, hypothetically, that means that you can go and install this pretty much anywhere in the city as long as they need an alarm. Is that true?
No, the reason for this text amendment is to allow for the electrification of a fence, and the structure, how you build it, is a little bit different from the image from the Amarok site. And as Mr. Pate described, there has to be the ability to carry the current through vertical pieces, that certainly hold it up. So our code currently restricts electrification only to animal enclosures. So I'll give you a funny story. I used to manage code enforcement for a long time. And one of the complaints we received was somebody had electrified their cyclone fence. And true enough, somebody had hooked up a car battery, ironically, very similar here to the situation, to an existing cyclone fence in a residential neighborhood. So the fence was only 4.5 feet tall because that was what the fence code allowed. And the reason it got turned in was, people were touching it and they were getting shocked. So you can add electrification to a structure, to a fence structure, but there has to be appropriate conduit materials to facilitate that. So no, they had to take the battery connectors off and stop electrifying their fence.
Thank you, Heather.
Sure.
I think is any public comments or anybody? Oh, I'm losing power on my phone. Excuse me. If there's no public comments, I'd like to open the discussion up with the staff and commissioners to address the questions we have and move forward. So I think I might need Zach's help as far as making sure that I cover all the required issues that we need to make tonight. So I'm going to start one first with the C1 zoning. Oh, you got it up there. Okay. So let's look.
So Cal, there's no consideration for the C1 zoning unless you'd like to.
No, I just want to make sure that everybody agrees and we move forward.
Sure. And these are these are just recommendations
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not speaking for the group, but I think that we should first decide two things is I think first we need to decide that this device is going to be called an electric fence, correct? Before we move forward in allowing and deciding on that. Was that one of the questions that we had to kind of decide whether I think Michael said that he wanted to be called as an alarm, right? I'm kind of not sure who said that.
Well, it's mentioned in the draft that it should be permitted as an alarm. It's in the draft.
So Cal, I don't believe that was under the consideration at all. I know I had a question for Heather based on that, but I think that doesn't pertain to what we have to make a decision on here.
Okay, thank you. So I think if Zach can help me, can you just let us know what, I mean, I have about 5-6 different things. I just want to make sure that we handle something in a fashion that I don't miss anything. So I think the first one was the height. We're going to consider 10 foot for the electric fence only.
He has them up on the screen, Cal.
Oh, it does. Okay. I'm using my iPhone. Sorry today.
No, no worries. He's saying the first consideration is allowing for limited use of electric fences in the C2 zone throughout the conditional use permit process, including
see.
additional. Okay, you got it? Cool.
So let's do one at a time. So let's address the first one, allowing limited use of electric fences in C2 zone. How does everybody feel if we allow this with conditional use permitting process?
I am 100% okay with that.
I'm okay with that too. How about Hank,
I'm fine with it.
Angelina?
Yeah, I'm fine with
All right, so we're gonna consider that to be allowed. Next one is going to be including additional language used by the city of Spokane to provide for regional consistency for the permitting of electric fences. I think we should allow that, right?
Let me walk you through these because there are a
Okay.
number of them that you may want to consider.
Okay.
So Spokane has a limitation for use only for outdoor storage, non-residential. So that would,
Can you put the code up on the screen? Sorry, to interrupt you.
yeah. Or do you want Spokane's code? I'm sorry.
Spokane's code, so they could read or see what you're reviewing from the city Spokane code.
That's gonna take a second. It is one. We can circle back around to this if you want to
Okay.
work on that last one there while I'm doing this.
Last one is including additional language that provides for more clear either or scenario when both barbed wire and electric fences are being considered. I think the question should be whether we want both or not.
So the question is right now the code isn't very clear if you can have both or not. So we're asking the commission to consider whether you want to provide some provisions within the code that make it clear whether you can have one or the other. The consideration there is that right now we're proposing that 8 foot tall with a 6 foot fence, and there's a 2 foot gap. But if you have barbed wire on that fence, then it becomes about a half a foot gap or 1.5 feet.
So that's 9.5.
Yeah, so it's just something to consider. And sorry, I'm trying, Heather, if you want to elaborate while I'm looking this up.
If I have your permission, Cal, can I ask Mr. Pate a question? If that's okay.
Go ahead. I might
So
lose
Mr. Pate,
some.
if
Go ahead, Heather.
would it, yeah, Mr. Pate, so in this
Can you hear me?
proposal to limit
Communication, sorry.
the exterior perimeter fence to 6 feet and not have barbed wire on it.
Hello?
Will that assist in the differential to the 8 feet, or is it a negligible difference to you to remove the barbed wire consideration on the exterior or perimeter fence?
Good question. You know, as far as my installation, it really doesn't matter. I just need the height above it. Taking the barbed wire down is an expense that's going to be borne by the owner of the business and the property. You know, and I'm gonna charge them for it. You know, it's not cheap to do that. You would think it would be, but as many times we've had to do it, it's not. So, you know, what we need is we need that height differential. And when we write it into code, we usually put it in there 2 feet or 10 feet or 2 feet higher than the existing perimeter fence or wall. A lot of places we go in, you know, they actually require in distribution type settings to have 10, 12, 14 foot walls up. So, and 10 feet is the standard for the industry. So everything we build and everything my competitors build is 10 feet. So, you know, anything under that, I got to start going in there and manipulating, meaning I got to cut it down and do a few other things to it. So I still need height. You need to be at least 2 feet taller than the existing structure, at least. If you got 7 feet, I need to get to 9. That's without pulling the barbed wire down, or 9.5, because I think we just said it was, Zach said it was 3 strands of wire got you to 18 more inches. So if you're at 6 feet, you're at 7.5. I need to be 9.5 to be effective in a book.
Yeah, I think that's predicating the assumption that all fences that you're building are gonna be behind an existing fence with barbed wire.
No,
Which
you were
I'm not
talking
sure.
about barbed wire. I was answering specifically about
Mhm.
barbed wire.
I was asking about if in a new fence. In a new
I've
fence
got to be
scenario.
at least 2 feet taller. 10 feet is the standard through the industry, because everyone builds to the standard. The standard's there for safety. That's why it's there. And so when you start manipulating a safety standard, you take the consequences in your own hands. We don't do that.
So to answer the question then, on a new construction, with a fence that's allowed to go to 6 feet and not allowed to put the barbed wire in, and there's a new construction of the electric fence with it, you'll be able to achieve your goal of the 2 feet. There may be a solution here that doesn't require modifying our fence heights as much. And I'm not sure if you've run across this with other communities, but in the fence code, you would be able to have a fence taller than the fence maximums when you're no longer in a required yard. Have you heard of that or experienced that?
Yeah, but that's, you start dealing with setbacks.
Well, yeah, so as an example, if there was a perimeter fence, which was required to be maximum of 6 feet, which is what our code requires in all zones, but you simply moved outside the required setback area, which in the industrial area could be as little as 5 feet, you'd be able to go up to the 10 feet in height.
Yeah, that's problematic, because they both have to work symbiotically. They have to be close together. So separating me out 5, 6, 8 feet, first of all, it takes up a lot of space. You start multiplying 6 feet around an industrial property, you're taking up a lot of ground. And the people who are out there on those properties don't want to give up the ground. Just not going to do it.
Mhm.
And they need to work closely together. 100 to 200 millimeters is what the standard tells you. And the reason you do that, 2 reasons. One is you don't want to have a zone of entrapment where, say, you're 2 feet wide, 2.5 feet of separation. Someone can drop down in there and get trapped there all night long. You don't want that to happen. They're not going to be injured, but it's going to be very uncomfortable for most of the night, even though they'll probably be able to get out of it, because we're basically a non-load bearing device. You can roll right through it if you have to. If you get too far apart, you're not working in conjunction with the perimeter fence, and we can be manipulated, and they can break in fairly easily that way. So you want it fairly tight. That's why we operate under the standard, 100 to 200 millimeters. We don't want to be farther than that apart from it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pate, for answering that question. So just to summarize, the concern is if you're retrofitting a site that already has barbed wire, the height, but for new construction, a 6-foot fence without barbed wire and an 8-foot electric fence will meet your requirements for height.
Yeah, and new construction is never the problem. It's always old construction, which is legally non-conforming. Those are always the problems with anything you do. With anything I do, that's always the curve that's thrown to you. So that's just the way it is.
Thank you.
So this is our draft and also the city of Spokane code here. So unfortunately, they're not kind of lined up, so I got to kind of search for them individually. But so one, this is currently this is in the city of Spokane's code. We don't include it. That electrical fences shall be permitted on any non-residential outdoor storage area. it seemed redundant is why we don't have it, but if you'd like to include it, we can.
Zach, I thought you were looking at the ones that you give in your staff report about the distance from schools. And
Yeah.
playgrounds.
Yeah, I'm going through them one by one here. There's like 5 or 6 of them. Those are included in that. So this is the second one here, which has to do with 150 feet of a property line for a resident or from a school or from a daycare, unless the exterior perimeter non-electrified fence is covered with a solid covering to further prevent contact with electrical fence.
So I wouldn't support 5A because that just is one that we just talked about, which is we're only proposing it in industrial areas.
Industrial.
In commercial zones.
So we couldn't use this language, then we have to kind of not consider this, right? Because we're taking off A, or are we gonna use some of the language from here?
It was my understanding that when we were discussing an adjacent communities standards, that we would take a look at it. We were looking at things like 5B specifically,
Okay.
which was having electrification of fences be a distance from basically the presence of children.
Yeah, so really you're looking at 5B and 5C here are the two you'd be considering.
Okay.
So
Any commissioners want to discuss this before we take this off? Five B and
honestly think
five
that-
C, okay.
Yeah, I know. I think that looks, I mean, just looks like common sense to me.
Okay, not, go ahead.
So would you like me to include this language in the draft or not?
I think we should. I don't know how the other commissioners feel.
Yeah, I think we should as well. I think it's just common sense.
Yeah, I think we should too.
Okay, Thank you. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Pate has a question.
Yeah,
Mr. Page, go ahead.
yeah, thank you. And we just talked about this. I mean, if you have a perimeter fence that is on the property line, and then I've got to go back 5 feet, it's not going to work. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
That's not what I'm
So
reading there.
it's
saying
all
on the
predicated
sidewalk.
on the perimeter fence. Wherever it goes, we're allowed to go behind it. You start pushing us back off perimeter fences, it's not going to work. You're basically taking the property away from the businessman or the businesswoman who is already operating there, and you're telling them they can't use that 5 feet on their fence line? Doesn't make much sense to me.
Mr. Pate, I understand what you're saying. I think the way I'm at least seeing this is where your client wants to have this fence installed totally makes sense. Don't see an issue with that on the perimeter line. But I do see like the schools, a residence, the daycare facilities to put it recessed back. So I would want that language maybe changed to where, and I don't know if we can do this, Heather, or not, but to where the 150 foot from the property line is not for the location that we're dealing with right now for this thing. And then going forward for schools, residents, all those things, it is addressed.
Mark, your audio is getting a little bit low, but I think that you had asked the question about the 150 foot setback language in the city of Spokane's code. And you were suggesting what? I didn't catch the last part of that.
So what I'm saying is I understand why we would want there to be a setback for residences, schools, daycare facilities and stuff. But for Mr. Pate's client, that's not what we're dealing with. We're in this different zone. So the property line, I understand why they would want this on the property line to make it work, the electric fence itself. Now, but if we're adopting this language to put into our code and we're just cleaning it up and making it clean, maybe we just have to change that so that the 150-foot setback from the property line is for residences, schools, daycares, this thing where people are going to interact with it, not at DA auto imports where the public shouldn't be walking through that area.
Yeah, so let me provide some clarity on this and how it applied to the city of Airway Heights. So the only residential use that we have near or in our industrial zones are existing non-conforming residences. So harkening back to our comprehensive plan conversation a couple of years ago in 2020, there are concentrations of residential uses in the midst of our heavy industrial zone, which include the 3 trailer parks and several different apartment buildings. There are not any schools adjacent to the industrial areas where this would be eligible, or even by the conditional use permit through CUP, because our only school is north of US 2. If there are daycare facilities, it would likely be in the C2 zone. So the hub, right, has a daycare preschool facility in it. So kind of contextually how we think about applying it. What this is suggesting is that it's 150 feet of separation from that industrial zone to these other uses. So contextually thinking, what is the goal of this particular provision? It's to not have a perimeter fence such as this that potentially is adjacent to a residential use, and hence Spokane adopted a setback of 150 feet. And we do have a lot of residential uses south of US 2. So what would you, thinking contextually in Airway Heights, what would be the goal you would like to have with the fencing for an industrial use that may develop or request fencing around or adjacent to one of those residential uses? We can help kind of formulate maybe what that would look like.
I'm honestly racking my brain trying to think anywhere that this would apply right now in Airway Heights, like where we would see this 150 foot from the property line of somewhere that would, I could think of the daycare south of 2, right up there on 2 though. The school is on the other side of the street. I understand what you said about the residents and the trailer parks. That's moving eventually, correct? And there's not that there's that existing stuff that's.
Well, we've been trying for 30 years, but we'll keep working on it.
Yeah, fair point. But I'm just thinking, like, because I understand Mr. Pate's clients' needs and what they would want. And I don't know if this rule would impact them or not, but future clients, there can't be that many that would be impacted by this 150-foot rule from the residents or school or daycare. But I'm also thinking about the opposite side, these residents, these schools, or these daycares, also their concerns and what they would want. So having that 150-foot.
I have a quick solution. Zach, can you bring up the zoning map? And can you zoom in on the trailer parks? Right. So you can clearly see the trailer parks here, right there at the corner of 18th and South Pogue, are where some of the apartment buildings are located. There are residential uses, scattered throughout this area. So if you go down South Garfield, I think there maybe a residence or two down in that area. So all that code is saying is that if for any reason they were going to put in this fence within 150 feet of a residence, or that there has to be this separation unless they agree to put in a solid perimeter exterior fence. And so I think the thinking behind this was by putting in a solid perimeter fence, they can go closer than the 150 feet, which addresses Mr. Pate's concerns about, pushing the fence further into the site by setback, but it will, as a trade-off, require the property owner to invest probably a different type of fence, a solid fence. And the goal, as appears, maybe to prevent, since there's such close proximity requirement between the perimeter fence and the fence that has the alarm, that by having a solid fence, it prevents the idea of reaching through in an area that might have children. So that's literally what that code section says, is you gotta be set back a great deal of area, 150 feet from the property line, unless you agree to put in the solid fence. And that's I think it's a trade-off to try and deter touching through a fence by having that solid material. So here we do have a lot of residential uses that code section isn't specific to residential zones, because we obviously have transition going on the south side of the US too. And for Mr. Pate, the reason is because much of this area is in an airport safety zone for Fairchild. And literally those mobile homes are in a crash zone for the end of the Fairchild Air Force Base field. And so this area has been identified as a non-residential use in the future, but we still have to contend with residential uses in the southern portion of the city.
So practically, Mr. Pate, I hope you can see that it's not about trying to stop people from putting the fence where it's at, and the city is creating a solution, or not creating a solution, but adopting text that solves this problem on both ends. And the majority of people I would see you doing business with will not be impacted by that 150-foot distance, and then you could put it right there on the perimeter.
Well, I just think this is a solution in search of a problem. I mean, there's no problem. This device cannot hurt anybody. So there's no cause for injury. It's not going to injure a soul. It can't injure a child. It can't injure a small animal. It can't even stop a pacemaker or alter the activation of a pacemaker. So what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve here? I don't understand.
And I'll be completely honest, if that's the opinion you take, then how is that deterring theft? So I think it's not solving a problem the way I see it. It's more ensuring that people feel safe in our community.
Therefore, you should install my fence everywhere.
Yeah, but today, this is Cal. It could be your fence, but say if we make this a blanket, somebody else is using your fence and there's a safety issue, then how do we combat that,
You have the safety standards that you put into the text, which is IEC 60335, which is the safety standard that dictates how it's installed and also how it's tested and how it's labeled and how the manufacturer, which is me and several other folks, actually put these things together. So it is a safe device if it is installed to the standard. That's why I always go back to the safety standard. The IEC standard has been vetted across all of Europe, all of America. It's been adopted in America as the ANSI standard 60335. It's a safe and reliable device. The reason it works is because your body abhors being shocked.
Zach, can you put the text back up? There, thank you very much. I just wanted to kind of follow up with the C provision, and the reason that I understand this is because I worked at the city of Spokane for 24 years, including being the planning director. But The city of Spokane has setback requirements for their fences from roadway edges and from sidewalks. So in all instances, fences, whether it's one of these types of electrified or a non-electrified fence, their code has setbacks in order to ensure clear path of walking and a clear path of driving. And those setbacks are 5 feet for all fences from the back of sidewalk. And it's 12 feet from the back of sidewalk when a fence is located on an arterial. I imagine that this 5C is mimicking that other setback that Spokane already has for a fence, any fence that goes along there. So I imagine this is part of their, kind of their clear path requirements along a pedestrian walkway is where this number comes from. I don't believe that Airway Heights has the same kind of setback. We can allow for a fence, chain link, wood, vinyl to go up to the back of the sidewalk. Zach can double check me on that. Was looking at the code. The question was ultimately looking at were there provisions of Spokane when we were asked to look at consistency with an adjacent jurisdiction that would be worthwhile consideration in addition to the technical review we've done. So should we consider setbacks from residential, essentially residential uses and daycare similar to Spokane, and consider overall setback from the back of sidewalk similar to Spokane for consistencies consideration?
This is Cal. I would like to suggest to use 5B and 5C. We could be here
That
all
makes
night
sense.
discussing this, and it could be hours of discussion, but I think we need to just decide what we think should be moving forward. So I propose 5B, 5C, and also I think the height too, right? 6. I don't know how the other commissioners feel.
Cal, I definitely agree with doing the
Yeah,
5B,
I don't think
5C.
residence area needs this electrical fence.
Yeah, I think this is appropriate language, 5B and 5C.
Yeah, I like that. Mark agrees. Hank?
Yeah, I'd like to move on, quite frankly. I think this gentleman it's probably not his first day installing these types of systems, and I don't disagree with him that there's no safety issue, like some little child walking into it or coming in contact with it and injuring themselves. And Michael, you speak up, but I think you'll follow all the requirements, correct?
If they're there, I will follow them.
There you
if I'm
go.
allowed to.
And I'm sure that much of your all the information regarding the installation and that sort of thing regarding your system there is all outlined in the draft, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I don't see where there's a big hiccup with this personally.
Angelina? Have you lost her?
Angelina, you're on mute if you can hear us.
Can she hear us? Angelina? Hello?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was blabbing too.
Oh, what do you think?
I said it's pretty specific because we are talking about non-residential. So I think it's appropriate and it's what Spokane's doing. It's just fine, B and C.
Okay. So I guess we would recommend 5B and 5C language to be used. We don't have to vote for this, do we? staff?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do we have to vote for this or we can just,
Yes,
I-
so, I think. what you're
Actually-
doing-
We should include A as well because it's going to be non-residential. Right?
Actually, we've restricted it to only some non-residential areas.
Oh, okay.
That's the
so I'll
proposal.
let, go ahead. Okay, sorry, Heather, go ahead.
So yes, certainly what you're doing, Cal, is to kind of go through the questions that Zach identified and get a feel for the plan commission on each of these issues. But ultimately, you'll need to do a vote to amend the draft with each of these changes. And so if someone, for example, were to say, I would recommend moving the draft forward to city council with the following changes to allow these types of fences in the C2 zone by conditional use permit with the underlying CP, to add the provisions from the city of Spokane municipal code regarding fences, section such and such number 5, B and C, the language therein, and so on and so forth. And then somebody seconds that motion and then you would vote for the whole thing. If that was your end goal.
Does any of the commissioners have anything on that they would like to discuss or question on the
No.
considerations?
No.
No.
Okay. So I guess the correct language would probably be that we, the planning commissioner, would like to move forward the considerations made tonight to the city council.
Mhm.
And I would like to take a vote and see if we're all in favor. So Scal, I think we should move forward. Mark,
Yes, I think we should move forward with those changes.
Hank,
So
That's a yes for me.
and Angelina?
Yes.
Yeah, all in favor.
Aye.
So Cal, we technically need someone to make a motion.
Oh, okay,
first,
sorry.
and then
All
we-
right, okay.
And then somebody to make a
Uh,
second.
I'm
yeah.
gonna ask Mark to do it.
I'll
Okay,
make a motion. I'll make a motion to adopt the recommended changes and update the text for the fence rules.
And I'll second.
All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Hey, I tried, didn't work.
No, see, Heather wants to hear like the she had that on point when she gave us exactly how to say it, but I have a short memory.
Same here, somebody should be writing it down.
It was so much easier when we were in person.
No, I'm writing it down. So I did have a clarifying question for the commission, and that was, are you wanting to keep the height as proposed or modify the height?
Heather, didn't we say that we would like allow that conditional use permit, otherwise adopt that height?
Can
The-
we use a conditional permit for the height?
No,
If
the
it needs to
conditional,
be,
no, the conditional use permit is to allow it in some of the C2 zones. The electric fence.
so the only way you can bypass the 10-foot is if we decide to add the barbed wire to that requirement, correct?
No, you could recommend that the draft be changed to allow the electric fence to be no higher than 10 feet versus the staff's recommended 8. That's a separate issue than eliminating the barbed wire. And I only
Okay.
bring it up because it's been talked about a couple of times, and I thought I had heard Hank indicated that he wanted to discuss that.
Do the commissioners feel good with 10 feet max?
Can we at least go on knowing that we passed the motion on the considerations for the separation for the 150 feet and the part C, I can't remember what the language was. So we don't have to go back and readdress those ones again?
No, you've already voted and a 4-0 to approve the CUP provisions and the distance requirements for the fencing.
This is a separate
Okay.
thing, right?
Yeah, so the height, again, on the Spokane County, their codes, our electrical fences shall be a minimum height of 8 feet and a maximum of 10 feet, with warning signs.
Clarity, that city of Spokane, not
Yeah.
Spokane County, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it
Go
should
ahead.
be no
With
more
the
than,
electric fence, we should be able to go up to 10 feet, right?
yes. It wouldn't be,
I
if
don't
it
know.
wasn't up to 10.
Staff wants it at 8 though, right, to keep it congruent with other things?
That was the recommendation from staff, yes.
I would like to be 10, so I don't know how the other commissioners feel.
Yeah, because if he doesn't, if we only go 8, then he can do barbed wire around. We don't want it to look like a prison, do we?
What staff's concerned with 10 feet? Heather?
The concern that staff had was the overall height of the fence in an area on the perimeter of the property. So our maximum is currently 6 feet, and in the industrial area, you can add, 3 stands of barbed wire. And so when we were thinking of consistency, 8 feet was pretty close to a 6-foot fence with 3 strands of barbed wire. So I think that from a visual effect and from an overall height, it was the most consistent standard we could recommend with our existing fence code.
Can you leave the standard at 8? And if there is a special case to go up to 10, like he was explaining that Michael was at, if next door neighbor was at 8?
Well, to this point, to be clear, there are no fences that have been permitted in the city that are 10 feet tall, that are in a setback area. Our code does allow for fence to be put up outside of the setback area. So it'd be at least 5 feet from a side yard, as an example, in an industrial zone. And then those fences can be taller. So there's this congruity, to use, I think, Mark's term, between how close a structure or an improvement is to, in this case, fences, are to the right of way or to an adjacent property. The purpose for setbacks are things like light, air, setting back improvements from adjacent uses. And that's why within setback areas, uses are limited so that you have kind of a transition both between the right of way and adjacent uses. But that's maybe not a preference, as Mr. Pate indicated of his client, that they would prefer to be at their property edge versus, pulled in 5 feet for the fence. But those are all the reasons that staff had recommended 8, is because they can go higher. They can actually go up to the building maximum anywhere else in the property than in a required yard. They can build a 20-foot tall fence.
How does the commissioners feel? Do we have to do a motion for this, Heather?
Yes, if you want to change the draft moving forward to the city council, you would make a motion and have it seconded.
How does the commissioners feel with 8 and 10? So we get an idea so that we can propose a motion.
I'm always gonna want to, I guess, not be more restrictive than Spokane, because I don't want the community to lose out to business to Spokane. So I would want to adapt Spokane's language.
Which is 10.
Yes.
Okay. Hank?
Yeah, I'm all about that.
Okay, Angelina, I was gonna skip you,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was in agreement with 10, 8 to 10.
Okay. So I guess, Mark, if you would like to make a motion to change it to 10 feet maximum, what's the language on this, Heather?
It would be a minimum of 6 feet currently and a maximum of 8. And so you could simply change it to a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 10 for the electrified portion of the fence.
Okay, Mark, you wanna do a
I'll make
motion for
them-
that?
I'll make the motion to change text from 6 to 8 feet to 6 to 10 feet.
For electrical,
Electrical fences.
who wants to second it?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor,
Aye.
okay.
And then one final motion, I'm sorry, you guys, which is there's a whole package of findings and resolution.
Oh, the amendments, right?
Can you pull up the staff report, Zach? And go to the findings and resolution. Perfect. No, go to the resolution. Here we go. So the final request would be for the Plan Commission to adopt resolution 2022-005 with the findings with regards to this application and forward this to the City Council.
Hold on, I'm just writing it out. Resolution PC 2022-005.
Can you page down a little bit, Zach? Thank you.
Is there anything in this document that we made a change tonight?
No, the findings of fact in your resolution are related to the process steps that Zach outlined. So we're amending a code, we're able to do so under the state law. You have the authority to make a recommendation. When did public notice occur? It's just really kind of the basics of
Okay,
documenting that the process was followed for a text amendment.
any commissioners have anything to discuss about this? Any comments? If none, I would like somebody to propose a motion to adopt resolution PC 2022-005.
I'll make the motion to adopt it as you cited.
Somebody want to second it?
I'll second that.
Okay, we're gonna vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of the dialogue tonight with the Plan Commission members and Mr. Pate. So just a summary from here, we'll be putting this package together for City Council for briefing. And we will share that information with Mr. Pate and Amarak as to when that briefing will occur. There will also specifically be a City Council public hearing because this is a legislative item. And the record in its entirety will be given over to the City Council for this, which will include minutes, the votes, the resolution, etc., of the Plan Commission and their recommendation.
Thank you, Heather. I would like to close the public hearing at 7:45 p.m. We don't have any action items today, but we do have a workshop for 2022 comprehensive plan, housing density and type. I'd like to hand it over to staff.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. As we continue to develop the draft of comprehensive plan, topic subject matter to you for input and recommendation.
Heather, you might want to kill your video. You're cutting out.
On looking at. Oh.
Can you hear us?
Hello, oh, I'm back. Sorry. I'm having some technology issues tonight.
You're not the only one, Cal.
I have no internet at the house. I can't use the laptop. I'm using the phone and the charge is at 5%.
Well, Heather's cut out right now in the middle of her report, so I think you're okay.
Okay. I'll
Well-
charge my phone.
We'll give her just a second, but essentially what is covered in the workshop is the housing densities and types that we're considering for the 2022 comprehensive plan. Jeff Arango is here to speak on that. So I'm going to let Jeff begin his presentation. We'll get Heather back in and we can circle around. So Jeff, you should have sharing privileges. So if you have issues, let me know.
Great, thank you, Zach. Let me just share my screen here. Great, good evening, commissioners. Again, my name is Jeff Arango. I'm the Director of Planning at Framework, and we're leading the comprehensive plan update with Heather and Zach in the community on the consulting side. And we wanted to discuss with you tonight some of our thinking and strategy around housing and zoning for the comprehensive plan update. So hold on, let me just put this in full screen here. Okay. So this is the preferred land use alternative, which I know you've seen before. And some of the major components of the preferred land use alternative are some swaps of urban growth areas. Those are the ones identified as F on there. There's also some properties that are being switched from industrial zoning to residential. And then there's some areas where we're proposing a change from low to medium density residential. We're also changing some of our assumptions around growth in the for housing in the downtown area. And so we'd like to discuss with you some further thinking on strategies related to housing types and to specifically address some of the missing middle housing types that we believe are desired in the community, but may not be being achieved currently. So right now there's 3 main zoning districts, as you know, and each one is sort of cumulative based on the lower density district. So the R1 district just allows single family, has a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet. The R2, you retain the single family, but you get the allowance for the duplex, generally looking at densities in neighborhood of 5 to 10 acres. And then the R3 district allows single family duplex and then a multifamily category and allows development up to 20 units an acre. And one of the things we'd like to discuss with you tonight is trying to take the multifamily category in the R3 and think about other ways that we could be more specific about certain housing types that are desirable in the community, because multifamily really encompasses a broad range of housing types, some of which may be more desirable or more needed in the community than others. So it's an opportunity to better align the comprehensive plan vision and goals with the types of housing that is to be developed in the community. So these are just some examples you may have seen before from Missing Middle Housing website, showing different examples, everything from duplex to the stacked duplex, fourplexes, courtyard building, which is a single building but has ground related units with individual entries, similar as well to the cottage court, townhouses, multiplex, triplex, which is a stacked format, and then live work. So there's a variety of types of housing that could be addressed through these missing middle housing strategies. And it's important to keep in mind that density is really just a math calculation. And so what we're really talking about are getting more specific about housing types or housing typologies that are desired in the community through the use table. So we have some examples we wanted to show you, one in particular over here on the west side. This is in Issaquah. It's called Issaquah Highlands. It's kind of a planned community, sort of in a new urbanist style, if you're familiar with that term. But it uses a traditional kind of street grid pattern, a variety of housing types, all in close proximity, in some cases, literally on opposite sides of the streets. And then you can see sort of the integration of stormwater facilities and open space, tree preservation. Looks like there's some community gardens here. So it's very much of a style, I think, that fits well with Airway Heights in terms of the existing pattern of development in the community. And then these are just some street view shots. And you can see in this image, very nice, attractive streetscape with sidewalks and street trees, and then single family on the right side of your screen, and then a variety of multifamily housing on the left hand side of the screen, but all kind of fits together in a similar architectural style, and is very walkable and I think attractive. Just another example, single family on the right hand side, on-street parking, street trees, and then multifamily ground related units. These are, this is one building with individual entrances and private space for each individual unit. And all of these units are accessed via a rear alley. So there's no curb cuts, which makes it a nice walking environment and safe for children and seniors and people that require that sort of safety. And then the last example is a cottage court. These appear to be single family homes, but they're fronted on a open space and are accessed through the rear of the homes via an alley and driveways. And again, it's a very nice kind of integration of traditional architecture, landscape, and open space to create a really nice kind of community feel through a variety of different housing types. So this slide kind of speaks to some of what we've discussed with Heather and Zach and would like to get your input on tonight. So for the comprehensive plan update, one of the things we'll need to do and we'll be doing, updating land use policies to support zoning changes. So if there was support to move forward with some of these middle housing strategies, we would start with the land use policies. And I have a couple of examples on the following slide. The next strategy would be to modify the R3, which again, we're not proposing in the preferred land use alternative necessarily to rezone any land that is R3, although we could reconsider that, but really focus on the types of housing and not just density numbers that the community would like to see. So rather than the broad multifamily category, we'd add specific uses for triplexes and fourplexes, townhouses, cottage housing, cottage court, senior housing, expand opportunities for accessory dwelling units, which are allowed in the city, but with some restrictions. And this would allow us to kind of eliminate that broad multifamily category. If there was a desire to have higher density housing than even the 20 units an acre, then we could reconsider some appropriate multifamily category and associated development standards as part of that. And then the last piece for your consideration would be to combine the R1 and R2, which are already quite similar. It's just really the allowance of the duplex and a little bit of a change in the maximum density between those districts to allow single family and duplex in both in the consolidated zones, triplex, fourplex, townhouses, cottage housing, which is a single family typology, and accessory dwelling units as modified through some updated standards. And then the last slide is just to show some examples of some existing policies that we'll be looking at, and some which actually I think already seem to support some of the strategies that were described on the previous slide. So one, encourage traditional residential development, which is kind of a cornerstone of the new urbanist example I showed you from Issaquah. typically featuring houses that face the street, utilization of alleys for parking and service access, which were in those examples, interconnected grid or small block street network, street sections designed for safety, traffic calming, and aesthetic appeal, narrower lanes, sidewalks, bike facilities, landscaping, lighting. So again, trying to fit these sort of missing middle housing typologies into the existing pattern of Airway Heights, I think is the goal, and to kind of avoid development patterns that are sort of not consistent with that. So developments that require, for example, really large parking lots, don't have a lot of street frontages, don't have a lot of sort of interconnectivity for vehicles, pedestrian, bikes, would sort of not really speak to this P7 policy. And then the last one I wanted to mention was consider location of multifamily development in areas that have access to arterial and collector streets, help buffer higher and lower intensity development patterns about compatible existing uses and are part of projects involving mixed use or master plan areas. So those are some of the policies that we'll be revisiting and bringing back to you as part of the draft plan here next month. And so with that, I'll happy to answer any questions and open it back up for discussion.
So this is Cal. I just wanted to ask you a question. When you propose a type of, say, single home, are we very specific on the aesthetic of the looks, or how do you define what the city wants so that distance?
That's a community choice, how specific you would like to be. I mean, my experience is most cities don't get into things like architecture for single family. They might get into that in their downtown or in their neighborhood commercial districts. But with that said, it's something, certainly that you could consider as a community. I think what we're really talking about are sort of neighborhood development patterns, and what I would say is more urban form. So, how are the parcels laid out? How are the streets connected? What do your trails and sidewalks look like? How do your residential development fit in with adjacent, maybe commercial areas? Maybe it's being more prescriptive about setbacks or the location of where you park vehicles or whether there's access through an alley. So I think it's those sorts of things, and maybe a little bit less on sort of the architecture side. But with that said, certainly something that you do have the power to regulate if you decided that was a direction you wanted to go.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff, this is Hank. I'm familiar a little bit with that Issaquah Highlands area, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the median home price out there is just north of $1 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess we're going to build $1 million neighborhood, Cal.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think it wasn't meant to show a super high end example, and I think there are certainly other examples that we could find that are less high end but still speak to the principles. And,
no, I get it, Jeff. I'm just giving you a little bit, but yeah, I am familiar with that area just a bit, and I think if I remember correctly, some of the streets seem a bit narrow. So if you get any kind of, on-street parking, it's kind of dicey.
They are quite narrow as a way to sort of slow the traffic, but I think there's a right sizing approach that you could utilize to avoid that, and maybe the city already has those standards in place. I mean, as someone that's lived in Seattle, where you have to literally try to, there's only one lane of vehicle travel on some of those residential streets, and very poor visibility at the intersections. I certainly understand that, and it's something certainly we would want to avoid through the city standards.
But Issaquah, that Highlands area, seems kind of European,
Yeah,
the way it's laid out, stuff.
It does, and I think when it's a master planned community like that, that does afford the opportunity for the developer, or if the city has a standard, to kind of pick an architectural style that is more traditional and cohesive. So, I mean, it's certainly something a developer can do. Where you have multiple actors over multiple smaller projects, it's a little bit harder to maintain. But yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely more of a traditional look and feel for that project.
Okay. Moving forward.
Well, if I could maybe pose
Oh.
some questions. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah,
You cannot hear me?
we can hear you, Heather.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We can.
Sorry, I apologize. My internet's unstable. So could you go back, Jeff, to the slide? There we go. So these are concepts that would guide the development of our housing chapter, and we need to kind of walk through this a little bit with you. So we do have some high density residential in our community. And my first impression and what was brought as kind of background projects to me was that Airway Heights has had difficulty with high density projects because of the concentration of the units that are located there, and that there was a desire to continue to facilitate housing, very much so, because we need it in our community, but maybe not in 4-story, 200 to 400 unit structures. So having kind of posed that concern to Jeff, our consultant, how could we think differently about still getting housing, getting ownership and rental opportunities into our community, and what we've arrived at is this idea that we might limit where large complexes can go in the city. Maybe that's the area that's immediately north of the downtown that we're proposing to be high density residential. But we would potentially consider other areas as they come into the city, or we were to potentially redesignate those high density residential, that there could be a lot more housing options. So maybe by not having as much equal access to large apartment buildings, they could still get to housing by doing low rise buildings, maybe still even on the same parcel, but contextually they look like they're repetitions of neighborhoods and they're repetitions of blocks. And those were some of the images that Jeff was showing you, is you can have a whole small development of single family homes on one parcel that looks like a residential block, but it might be an ownership or a rental opportunity. The yards are significantly smaller, it's shared common open spaces. And that's what the cottage housing or cottage court specifically can be. So kind of, I want to bounce that off of you first and kind of get your feeling about that. I mean, do you think that'd be something that our community could accept? Or do you think that there's a need to keep plowing forward with large multifamily projects? Do you, in your own past experience, have you ever lived in any of these other types of housing? Could you see a need for people as they transition in their life for any of these types of housing?
I mean, looking at Airway Heights, the existing residents has been there for many, many years. They will probably hesitate something like this, but people that are moving in new wouldn't have an issue with that. So I think but as we progress, the city is changing, and we're starting to see this kind of development. So we in the meeting haven't had anybody come and make a comment or complain about it from the public.
I feel like that everything I hear from people that live in Airway Heights is they just need places to live, and that those places don't really exist. That's like the common refrain in Airway. So most of the people that work in Airway, they live outside of Airway Heights. It's very difficult. And I know like we don't have a bunch of land to develop residential anyhow. So it's how do we make that the best for the future of Airway, especially like, because I think a lot of people get out of the Air Force and start living in Airway Heights, and they just contribute to that community.
Well, that's a really good point, Mark, and that kind of jumps into the next point, which is we have more than, well, I would say probably at least 80% of our total residential areas are right now only R1 single family. And we are proposing in the plan to redesignate several areas to medium density residential. So we would be adding, I think, over 110 acres of potential medium density residential if this land use map were approved by city council. So what we're doing above and beyond that medium density residential, that rezoning, so to speak, potentially in this project, would be this idea of allowing in the R1 and the R2, which are our current implementing zones for our low density and medium density category, is thinking of them as being more fluid, you know, being a category, but you could see on an empty lot, you could see a duplex instead of being exclusively single family, or you might see townhomes on some property north of, let's say, 6th Avenue, you know, those long rectangular vacant lots, you know, maybe you see townhomes there, or a cottage housing development, or maybe you'd see a fourplex. So this is a very challenging idea to the public too, because this thought that next door there might be something different than a detached single family, that there could be somebody building a granny flat behind their house, or that there might be a duplex next door. And this kind of change of thinking about allowing the single family and the duplex zone, formerly known, which is our low density category, medium density category, allow all of these uses.
Yeah, that would be very, very beneficial for the community, Heather.
So one of the things that we haven't really talked about is a lot of the conversation happening nationally, really for about 3 or 4 years now, that so much of a local community is tied up in single family zoning, and that it becomes exclusive to people financially. People have difficulty being able to live in areas like this because of the large size of the homes or the lots. There is disparity, you know, racially, socially, because of these types of zones. There's a history behind the creation of the single family zone that it's not very bright and shiny, I would say. So what this kind of movement, which other communities have done over the last couple of years to allow for other kinds of housing in their single family or low density, is allowing diversification of the housing, allowing diversification of housing type. It allows for diversification of price point, which gets to the comment that Mark made, that people said, well, there just isn't housing. It allows for a variety of housing to be built, and it builds an incentive by allowing these kinds of these types of housing for people to build, because they can do more with a piece of property than they
Heather, you're getting a little unstable again. If you could turn your camera off.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I don't know if Jeff mentioned this, but what we think of who lives in a community is radically changing over time. And Jeff may have already mentioned this, but I think about a third of individuals are single head of household means they're living by themselves and they have no children. But how much of our housing, if 80 or 90% of our housing is a single family detached home, are we really needing for people who are in that type of situation? And that's all age groups. That isn't just people who are over 65. That's throughout their, age groups that are single head of household.
I just know, like, in all the years I've been in Airway Heights, the people I consistently run into that live there, it's families. But there's a whole bunch of other people that don't live there that go there every day for work. It would be nice to have them living there. I feel like it's a little bit unfair. I know how we've planned going forward in the past, which is try to limit these to single family residences. I would love to see more of these multifamily residences.
Well, let me ask a question here, and maybe Heather, you could field this question. Imagine we have a second elementary school downstream and maybe eventually a middle school and a high school. What do you suppose the demand for housing is going to be? Single family residences or duplexes, townhouses, that sort of thing?
Well, I guess the first thing that I would say is that presently 40% of the population in Airway Heights meet the United Way definition of ALICE, which is asset limited, income constrained, and employed, which means that while statistically they don't meet HUD standards of being in the poverty level, which is 80% of our area income, when looking at factors like utilities, transportation, daycare, and food, they're essentially the working poor. That's currently 40% of our population. Technically, over 17% of our population as of 2021 is below the poverty line. So I would pose the question back to you, Hank, if we have 40% of our population that have limitations on their income and 17% are below the poverty rate, what kind of housing do you anticipate that our community would need in the future?
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, typically teacher salaries are pretty decent now, right? Given all the activity and the work that the unions have done. And that's why I'm sitting here wondering, I understand the low income issue here, but is that the type of, I'm trying to look out, right? Maybe 10, 20 years downstream. What do we want this community to look like? A bunch of apartments and, multifamily type dwellings. And what, I guess more importantly, is what is the demand going to be if you have, say, husband and wife, they got some kids, and they're both working, and so there's a little bit better income there. Is the demand with those schools here, and who knows, maybe there's a hospital that goes up someday around here. You certainly got the demographic to support it, I think. What's the demand going to be? Is it going to be single family homes, or is it going to be more like what Mark was talking about? I just need a place to live, which could be an apartment. I don't know.
So the answer to that question is we need both. We need to provide housing variety and choice. And so what we're really talking about is right now we have limited choice. The choice in Airway Heights is you can live in a single family detached home, you can live in a mobile home, or you can live in a 200+ unit multi-building apartment complex. And so when I say it's 200, that there's larger than that because there's multiple buildings. Those are really the choices that you have. So I would say in the future, we need to provide housing choice, owner and renter opportunities, and we need to do it in a way that allows also people to make different choices as they go through their life cycle. So what we hear in current planning, Hank, is people are looking for opportunities to build senior housing. We get asked all the time about being able to do townhome development. We get asked frequently, almost as often as townhomes, the ability to build duplexes.
Duplexes, okay.
And we get asked frequently about building cottage housing. So we do get those requests and we have interest in doing that, but our current code is extremely restrictive to the point of prohibitive of doing these types of housing. So as Jeff mentioned, you can't do an accessory dwelling unit unless you go through a conditional use permit. You're adding 4 months of process and $3,000 to the cost of a project to, add a unit to the back, which for most people is a one-time in their life they're ever going to do it. It's not something this is not something a developer does. It's an individual. Our townhome standards are so restrictive that they can only be exercised in our high density residential development projects with a PUD, which again is time and cost. It's not outright permitted, and our base issue is we don't have our development standards don't facilitate it. Our lot sizes are too big. They're way too big, and they're probably designed to be that way to steer the community to detached single family. So the question really for the planning commission is, what kind of housing do you think that we need to have moving forward in this plan? And I will give you a spoiler alert, Hank. When we go to do the 2026 update, which is our required update, we will have to do an analysis of what we actually need to do by type of housing, and we have to show the math that we are providing enough housing in each of these categories. So we're not quite there, but we're going to be there in a couple of years. But we do have demand now.
Heather, sometime during the past 6 months, we had the information of all the jobs in Airway Heights, and it showed that the service industry was like the predominant employer in Airway Heights. I don't know if that has changed or not, but I just can't see it changing that much. Those are going to be the people that are want to live in Airway Heights.
I agree, Mark. Those are people who want to live in Airway Heights. We can take a look and see if there's any updated data. Anecdotally, we know that the service industry took a huge hit during COVID. So COVID's going to skew those retail and service industry numbers probably. We also know from STA, which did an analysis of ridership, and I believe WashDOT participated in a study looking at where people are driving to and where they're arriving from. And I'll get that data and we'll share that with you, but it was a startling amount of people who work in Airway Heights are from outside the area, something in excess of 80%. And 90% of people who live in Airway Heights work somewhere else. So we've got a huge amount of people coming in to work here, AKA your employment data, Mark, that we talked about with the industrial sub-area plan. But the people who are living here are going somewhere else to work. But yet at the same time, we do know from the United Way data that people who are here are still constrained economically pretty substantially. That's only 40%, the other 60% don't meet that threshold. But I'm not sure that employment data, strictly speaking, is gonna let us know who wants to live here, because clearly the pattern right now is people are living here and working elsewhere. And part of the industrial plan was to kind of even that out and get higher wage jobs for residents and also give that opportunity for people who live here to be employed here instead of traveling to the valley or upward. I think the data was showing North Spokane were some of the big destinations for employment.
I just don't think it's coincidental that the Native American land right next door to Airway Heights is building all these multifamily residences, and that's where people seem to be moving to in Airway Heights, where we've restricted this in our own city.
Well, we haven't restricted it, Mark. You can build a multifamily building today in Airway Heights. The difference between the Kalispell travel property in Airway Heights is there is 200 acres of undeveloped land available, where when we look at our land use map, we're down to really a 5-acre duplex piece of property off of 6th Avenue. The remainder of all that property up in the northwest corner is already tied up in an ownership that's attempting to develop it at lower density housing. So I think it's availability of land at the right zoning that makes the Kalispell travel property a lot more lucrative right now. And, maybe with this land use plan redesignating the 50 acres up off of Hayford Road or increasing the density north of downtown, we might be able to see more multifamily projects. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, everybody froze there for a moment. Really kind of, we're hoping for tonight is some kind of direction if you were considering these options, or there's other options. Mark would like to keep a multifamily option available. Trying to really get some direction for Jeff and us as we work on that housing chapter.
I like the cottage cart type housing.
Hello, can you hear? No? This is Cal. If we combine R1 and R2, do we eliminate R1 completely?
It would not, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's a decision point, but I think by combining them, you would certainly still have the ability to develop single family. That certainly wouldn't go away.
So you would take existing R1 and rezone it to R2 and leave R1 still there available in the regulations, right?
Well, yeah, for example, maybe R1 is sort of a legacy zone or something for existing properties, or you could just outright combine it and eliminate the R1, because really the only difference is right now is the allowance for the duplex and a change in the density. But this would expand those sort of ground related type missing middle housing typologies that we showed earlier.
Yeah, I personally think that combining R1 and R2 would be a good idea.
I agree. Any step in that direction is a good idea.
And then going to R3, the last item says eliminate multi-family category.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, so this is maybe a little bit confusing. I would say currently the multifamily category embodies some of these kind of typologies we're talking about, right? Like a a cottage court is really a multifamily type of building, but it's a specific type. So what this is really is getting rid of the broad multifamily category and then being more specific about the types of multifamily that's desirable, which are the categories here. But generally maintaining that same density. So we're not proposing an increase in density. I think what we're saying is we can achieve that up to 20 units an acre without the 200 unit apartment building typology, but we can do it through the more traditional kind of neighborhood patterns that I think make Airway Heights really attractive place to live, and why people like to be there and want to stay there, and those sorts of things.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
No.
I guess the proposals look kind of acceptable by everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are going to be bringing this to an open house next month. So we're going to get input from the public, and there's more process to go. I think what we're really just looking for is a nod to continue refining this and going through the process of getting input, before a final decision is made.
How does everybody feel, the commissioners?
I absolutely feel it's in the better direction. I know in the past we've talked about trying to make it more single family units. So I think this is definitely in the right direction, meeting those needs in the future.
Yeah, and to be clear, this will not restrict single family, in any way. All of these districts would continue to allow it. But to Heather's point, there are new state requirements that are coming from the legislature in terms of how cities plan for housing, and also their accountability and tracking of actually meeting those measures. So those sort of reporting requirements and being able to kind of show the math and show that you're kind of meeting the policies that you set out in your plan is going to get more strict over the next several years, certainly into the next major comp plan update that's going to happen in a couple of years. So this is a great opportunity for the city to get ahead of the issue and be prepared for when those new requirements really kick into gear.
I guess based on everybody's opinion, we will just move forward with these suggestions you have.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm having problems with internet and phone today. Okay, so
The theme tonight.
my wife's gone out and probably didn't pay the bill.
I was just gonna mention Stephanie emailed and sent her apologies. She's traveling and she wasn't able to make it back in time for this evening's meeting.
Are you done with the stock workshop?
Yes, we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation and information. I'd like to open up for commissioners' report. If any of my commissioners have anything to say.
I don't have anything, Cal.
Hank, Angelina?
I just had a question. Maybe you guys have already talked about this before I ever joined, but I guess where I'm having a little bit of trouble, and I don't want to belabor this, but what kind of an identity do we want for this city? Like, oh, Airway Heights is a bedroom community, people sleep there, clean up there, eat there, and then they work somewhere else. Or is it like, oh, Airway Heights is a great retirement community? I'm trying to get my head around what is the identity that we want to have for this city? You know what I mean? Have you guys talked about that?
I feel like,
go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I've been here since 2013. and Airway Heights was kind of busy then. I mean, some context, I lived here when I was a very, very small child, and it was like nothing here.
Yeah.
And then 2013, it wasn't as busy or industrious. And since that time period, it just has continued to grow nonstop. And it's mostly on the industry side as far as I see. And it feels like the community is trying to keep up with that, make sure that we keep that coming in, keep those businesses expanding, keep bringing in more people to the community to meet with that, keep our Air Force partners, and make sure that we just keep growing this community.
I don't think we have a clear definition of which way the city is going. I think we're just transforming as the growth is taking place.
Well, you know, I apologize. I don't want to drag the meeting on just because, but I just, maybe it's just me, but I'm just trying to figure out, what do we really want to become in the years to come, you know?
Well, I feel
like if you look at that Issaquah Highlands, where the median price of a home is just, like I said, north of $1 million, that's the average home price. So it's a very nice area, very high end. That certainly is not Airway Heights, right? So I guess I'm just trying to picture in my mind's eye downstream, what do we want to be noted for when people say, oh yeah, Airway Heights, I know Airway Heights, that's a great retirement community. They have this, that, and the other thing, all geared towards seniors, or not to, you know, forget the rest of the folks, but you know what I mean? Like all the facilities and hospitals and all of this kind of stuff is really geared to the senior retirees. A lot of the people might be retired from the Air Force, you know, our neighbors, as Mark put it. And so I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around what do we really want to become, you know?
Well, I feel like, honestly, Hank, that's what we've been doing. When I first started, and Cal's been here a lot longer than me, there wasn't this stuff going on. I mean, like, none of this planning was going on. And then the city hired Heather, then Zach got hired, and work actually started happening. We updated this comprehension plan, and we've been like slowly meeting these state requirements and bringing the city up to code just on that requirement side. And I think that, like, these things right here is part of it. We're just creating this identity. They're trying to catch up to all the growth that has happened. It's just, from my own perspective, has been pretty substantial, and I can only imagine how the city has handled that. So we're all trying to catch up with it at the same exact time, you know?
Well, for what it's worth, I think it was a good measure hiring Heather and Zach to be the players on this thing, because to date, you know, you guys both have done an outstanding job, no question about that. But I don't know, I guess I'll just have to deal with it.
To add to Mark's comment,
Well, and
I was here before then, and nothing was happening. Every time nothing was happening, but the city was stalled as far as growth and everything concerned. And when these two people came into the picture, and all of a sudden it was a transformation into something wow, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Hank, that I think that the comprehensive plan process that we're going through now, so we did one before, but again, it was about getting to where we need to be, but that's part of the point of the process, is to try to identify and decide who we want to be, and then publish it through this. So I noticed a lot today that there are a lot of different views, but just between, you know, the four of you guys. And I think posing that question is good because it makes everybody think about it. So it's great, but keep that in mind, is that's literally what we're doing, you know, once a month right now, is we're defining what Airway Heights is going to be.
You know,
terms.
Zach, I appreciate what you're saying. And again, I'll shut my mouth here in a second, but you know that old saying, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. Yeah, I don't want to be there, you know. So yeah, I appreciate that this is all a process, and it's important, you know, I get it. But I just, you know, when you're working hard on something, you kind of envision a goal, right? Like, what are we building here? And what's that gonna look like 20 years from now?
Yeah.
You know? And so that's just, maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself. That's probably the case, but anyway.
No, you're not getting ahead of yourself, and I agree 100% with what Zach is saying. This process is intended to identify that bright star that we're working toward. What we have heard to this point is that, you know, people want this to be a town. I feel like it's almost a Pinocchio story. They want it to be a real town with a real heart, and that, you know, not just a place that people pass through.
Right.
And that those people who already live here already feel like that about the community. They just want others to realize that Airway Heights is a town, and they want to see the change that is going to help define it, really, you know, to have that heart, you know, the neighborhoods, you know, and then have people see what people already appreciate about this community. So I think it's both an inward and an external image of what Airway Heights should be. And each of these plans, if we can, you know, get them built upon, because, you know, we can plan all day, you know, Zach and I have, you know, lots of time we can do that, but it's getting it built that I think is what people want. And they want to see the physical changes that help it be the town that they believe it to be. Is that what others have been hearing at some of the other events or activities? That's just my impression I've taken away.
Well, I appreciate that. We certainly don't need to spend any more time on that now, but anyway, I appreciate your patience.
Oh yeah, totally.
Thank you, Hank. Staff reports?
Go ahead, Zach.
You want me? Okay. Should know by now, I'm always going first at this point. Well, let me echo Hank's sentiment about appreciating your patience. I appreciate your patience, every single one of you. I know I say that it's a broken record. I know Heather says it, but genuinely showing up, you know, every single month, paying attention, taking notes, asking questions, making those decisions. It's really important, and we really appreciate it because it makes our jobs and our lives easier. And it also helps that everyone on the planning commission is just, you know, genuinely really nice people. So again,
Well, it's because the pay's so high, Zach.
it's the benefits, right? Yeah. The company car.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
So again, appreciate it. On the planning side of things, right about now is when our current planning explodes. Once the weather starts turning and gets a little warmer, of course, this week, you know, being the exception to that. But we've phone calls have probably tripled, asking about potential projects anywhere and everywhere throughout the city. So we are taking care of that as best as we can. We are finalizing, well, finalizing probably isn't the correct term, but we're moving forward with the rebranding and logo and website project for the city. So we're getting some momentum on that. We're hoping to have some stuff finalized here in the next couple of weeks, where we can, and we'll announce that, and we'll talk about that probably next month, the specifics of what that. And Cal, I appreciate you participating in that process, and you gave some great feedback, and you know, it definitely implemented and helped our decision. So we appreciate that. Let's see, what else do we have here? The Arts Commission, we've talked about a million times. We're still working on recruitment. We're possibly going to do some tweaking to the actual ordinance. It won't come to you guys, it'll go straight to City Council. But we're going to try and open it up a little bit, make it a little easier for people to apply to that. So we're hoping to get that off the ground, again, you know, pretty quick here. I think that's kind of all I have right now. My time is being dominated by managing current projects. But I really appreciate you guys participating. It was great that you guys got to meet Jeff. We've been doing a lot of really good work with Jeff. Very, very smart guy, knows what he's talking about, and is doing a lot of really, really cool stuff to comp plan. So again, for the 1,000th time, thank you so much. And Heather.
Well, great staff presentation. I too very much appreciate you, and I appreciate the debate that we have. on many of these topics. I really do. You guys are a lot to ask and go through this material and hear all the sides of an issue and make a recommendation. Just as you know, there's quite a few projects running through right now. So the 12th Avenue signal, I think you've watched the media piece on that. That's about to go in. We're still working on the design connecting Airfield to Hayford Road. So it's looking like it probably will be under construction next year. One of the major factors is that the costs of materials are going up so quickly that while we had applied for full funding from the Transportation Improvement Board for the project, it now is only resting at about 80% of the project costs. That's how significant the escalation in materials and labor costs have been. We are working on grants because it is grant season. So we just submitted a grant to the Spokane Regional Transportation Council to do the planning and pre-design work for the downtown plan for the area between Lawson and Lundstrom. So that was looking at controlling the intersections at both ends of that 2-block area, looking at methods for enhanced crossings on King Street, which was part of the downtown plan to create that part of our north and east-west axis for a downtown area. So we asked for almost $900,000 from SRTC that would be given over the next couple of years to do that design. Why we asked for design? Because that project in last year's dollars to actually build it was probably between 10 and 12 million. It's probably higher than that now. And it's difficult to put together a single grant source to help pay for that much, the project. So keep our fingers crossed, we'll at least get the planning done. So it'll make what's called 100% design, which will be a shelf-ready project that we can apply for construction funding to get through and get that built. So again, trying to get plans off the shelf and get them built and implemented. I think we've reported previously that we did get a grant for $2 million from Spokane Transit Authority. So we're finishing the roadway connection on 6th Avenue over to Craig. So that'd be huge for us to finish the road. Transit will come all the way down with 3 additional stops on 6th Avenue. We've been discussing also another grant we're going to apply for that was for the demonstration project we did last summer over at King Street and 10th Avenue. So we'll be applying for, I believe, $800,000 to build that intersection improvement with crossings and to build sidewalk down 10th Avenue back toward, well, it's almost Aspen Prairie. So we'll be submitting that application by the end of this month, and that's to the Washington State Transportation Improvement Board, but this is specific to Safe Routes to School funding that we're looking for there. So that's all good news on the grant fronts moving forward. We're working with the consultants to finalize some predictions of 6 and 20-year projects in the city, residential, capital, and industrial, so that we can get the forecasting we need to get our transportation capital facilities chapters done. So our goal, just to give you an update, is we're still trying to have an open house in May on a preliminary draft of the comprehensive plan. That's why tonight and each of the meetings that we've been having since last fall are so important, as we're doing these touchstone conversations with you about your feedback on which direction the plan should go. Because once we have a draft, there's a lot of pieces looking at what would the water demand be, what would be the roadway demand, and where should we think of filling in sidewalks are going to be based on these ideas of where growth is going to occur. Good news is that with the limitations on in-person meetings having been rolled back, we are planning for that to be an in-person event, and we're hoping to do it over at the Recreation Center. So those of you that were here before during the 2020 comprehensive plan, we did our open house over the recreation center. It was a huge success with hundreds of people come through at that location, and we hope to replicate that in-person event experience in May when we do the open house. So what that will mean for you is that we will be bringing drafts potentially in early May, certainly into the summer of the document. Unfortunately, that means lots of more midnight oil reading by everybody here. The good news is that the goal of this plan is to be basically a citizen-based plan. So it's going to be concise. It will be web-based, and it will be maps and images with some text. So it's not going to be big, but there will be some technical documents that we're required to prepare that are going to become appendices and background material that we may talk about. So again, this is going to be a coffee table version of a comp plan. It's designed for you, for people who come into the city to figure out what's going on, what we're doing, and what they need to do. So it's not going to be a complicated wordy document. No more 400-page comp plans for anybody. So I think that's updates on the long range projects that we've got going on. Won't talk too much about the water rights stuff and current planning. We are still waiting for the Kalispell tribe to let us know if the development agreement is acceptable. That would be the next step in reviewing the rezone for the property at 10th and Burfield. So we're not going to schedule it till they come back and say they're ready. So we just keep rolling that forward as an agenda item for the Plan Commission. And we're very, very close to getting the preliminary plat application for 33 acres up in the northwest portion of the city. It's been a long time coming and doing lots of studies. So maybe by June, we'll have the opportunity for a briefing on that preliminary plat application with you, with maybe a July public hearing on the preliminary plat. So it'll be 160 plus lots that are proposed in that area. So those are probably the big picture things. Any questions about long range or current planning, or
Really quick, guys, I did share a link in the chat. That is the write-up that Smart Growth America did on our Complete Street project on King Street that you guys participated and helped out with. So if you want to take a look, it's really cool. So
Thank you.
it's a super cool project. So thank you very much for everything you do. It's almost 9 o'clock. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody for devoting their time and effort to this great cause. If there's no further questions or any questions, I would like to adjourn the meeting at
8:48.
49.
49. Oh, come on.
I thought we were going to finish.
All right. Well, we're losing Cal, I can tell. So again,
Good night.
all right. Take care.
Good night, everybody.